The snow crunched beneath my boots as I stepped outside the cabin. The cold air bit at my cheeks. The forest was covered in white, with trees standing tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the heavy feeling in my chest since we arrived. "Clara, you okay?" David called from behind me, worry in his voice. "Yeah, just looking around," I replied, forcing a smile. I turned to him, trying to hide the unease that had been creeping in since we got here. The cabin was old and falling apart. Its wooden walls were cracked and peeling. Inside, the air felt thick, like it was hiding secrets I wasn't ready to find. David had suggested this trip, hoping it would help me heal. But every time I closed my eyes, I was pulled back to that night, the night everything changed. "Let's get some firewood," David said, his breath visible in the cold air. I nodded and followed him to the shed. Our dog, Max, ran ahead, his tail wagging, happy and carefree. As we gathered wood, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The wind howled through the trees, but it almost sounded like whispers, echoing my fears. I glanced at David, who was busy stacking the logs. "Do you hear that?" I asked quietly. "Hear what?" He looked up, confused. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just the wind." But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Later, as the fire crackled in the fireplace, I tried to push my worries aside. David sat across from me, his eyes warm and kind. "We'll get through this, Clara. Just take it one day at a time." I nodded, but the shadows in the corners of the room felt darker. The echoes began then, soft at first, like distant whispers, but growing louder as the night went on. I could have sworn I heard a scream, sharp and piercing, cutting through the silence. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. David paused, his expression changing. "I didn't hear anything, Clara. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," I snapped, surprising myself. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "I just feel like this place is watching us." "It's just an old cabin," he said gently. "Let's focus on the fire and try to relax." But as the night wore on, sleep escaped me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the echoes of my past mixing with the strange sounds of the cabin. I could hear them clearly now, screams, laughter, and whispers, all swirling together in a storm of dread. The next morning, I decided to explore the cabin. I needed to distract myself from the memories that haunted me. As I wandered through the dusty rooms, I found a door hidden behind a tattered curtain. My heart raced as I reached for the handle, a mix of fear and curiosity flooding my senses. "Clara?" David's voice called from the other room, pulling me back to reality. "I'm fine," I shouted, pushing the door open. The room was small and dark, the air stale. As I stepped inside, I felt a chill run down my spine. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and in the center stood a table, cluttered with old papers and photographs. I picked up one of the photos, and my breath caught in my throat. It showed a woman, eyes wide with fear, tied to the table. The realization hit me hard, this cabin had a dark history. "Clara!" David's voice was closer now, filled with urgency. I quickly shoved the photo into my pocket, feeling its weight heavy against my chest. "Coming!" I called back, my heart racing. I stepped out of the room, closing the door behind me. When I rejoined David, worry was etched on his face. "What were you doing?" he asked, his voice tense. "I just found a room," I stammered, unsure of how to explain. "Let's just stay together, okay?" he said, taking my hand. "This place gives me the creeps." But that night, the echoes grew louder, filling the cabin with a heavy energy. I could hear the screams more clearly now, each one resonating with my own buried fears. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. "David, I can't take this anymore," I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I need to leave." "Let's just get through the night," he urged, pulling me close. "We'll figure this out in the morning." But as I lay in bed, the echoes turned into something more frightening. They weren't just sounds, they were alive, feeding on my fear. I could see shadows moving in the corners of my vision, and I knew we had to escape. In the early hours of the morning, I woke to find David gone. Panic surged through me as I called his name, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. I rushed to the hidden room, hoping to find him there. David stood in front of the table, staring at the photographs, his face pale. "Clara, look," he said, pointing to a photo that showed the cabin surrounded by twisted trees. "It's like they're watching us." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "We need to leave now," I said, grabbing his arm. But as we turned to go, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. The echoes grew louder, swirling around us like a storm. I felt the walls closing in, the cabin alive with a dark presence. "Clara!" David shouted, panic rising in his voice. "We have to fight it." I yelled back, but the echoes drowned out my thoughts. In that moment, I remembered the photograph I had found. The symbols. I shouted, "They might help us break this." We rushed back to the hidden room, and I began to trace the symbols on the wall with my fingers. As I did, the echoes grew louder, each scream resonating with my deepest fears. "Clara, hurry!" David urged, his voice strained. With one final push, I pressed my palm against the last symbol. A bright light filled the room, and the echoes shattered into silence. The door flew open, and we stumbled out, gasping for air. The cabin felt different now, its heavy weight lifting. "We did it," David said, pulling me into a tight embrace. But as we stepped outside, the forest felt eerily quiet. The echoes lingered in my mind, a reminder of the darkness we had faced. "Clara, are you okay?" David asked, concern in his eyes. "I will be," I replied, though I knew the echoes would always be a part of me. We walked away from the cabin, the snow crunching beneath our feet, but the shadows of that place would haunt me forever. As we drove away, I glanced back at the cabin, its windows dark and empty. I realized then that the echoes fed on my fears, but they also pushed me to confront my past. I was still carrying the weight of my trauma, but now I had David by my side. Maybe, just maybe, I could learn to silence the echoes. I adjusted the straps of my backpack, feeling the weight of my supplies pressing against my back. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the trail ahead. I had heard stories about this place, the Vanishing Trail, where hikers had disappeared without a trace. But I was a skeptic at heart, and I was here to prove that these tales were just that, stories. "Just a hike, Jake," I muttered to myself, shaking off the unease that crept in at the thought of the trail's dark history. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and damp earth, and set off down the path. The first hour was uneventful. I passed a few other hikers, their laughter echoing in the trees, but soon they faded into the distance. I preferred the solitude. It gave me time to think, to escape the chaos of my life back in the city. I was searching for clarity, or maybe just a way to forget my problems. As I walked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The sunlight dimmed, filtered through thick branches that seemed to close in around me. I shrugged off the feeling of being watched. It was just my imagination, I told myself. Then I saw her. A woman stood a few feet off the trail, her translucent form shimmering in the dappled light. She wore a tattered hiking outfit, her expression a mix of fear and desperation. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, backing away. "This isn't real," I said, my heart racing. I turned and hurried down the path, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But the encounters didn't stop. As I pressed on, I encountered more figures, a man with a broken compass, a child clutching a stuffed bear, and an older couple holding hands, their faces etched with sorrow. Each one tried to communicate, their voices overlapping in a haunting chorus. "Beware the shadows," the man shouted, his eyes wide with fear. "Turn back," the child cried, tears streaming down her ghostly cheeks. "Find the truth," the couple urged, their hands trembling as they reached out to me. I stumbled back, my skepticism wavering. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, but they only faded into the trees, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. I pressed on, my mind a whirlwind of confusion. Was I losing my grip on reality? Or was there something more sinister at play? I needed answers. As I hiked deeper into the woods, the trail became less defined, the air thick with an unsettling energy. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I knew I was being drawn towards something. Then I saw it, a narrow path veering off to the left, overgrown and dark. It felt wrong, but a part of me was compelled to follow. "Jake," a voice called, echoing through the trees. It was the woman again, her figure flickering like a candle in the wind. "You must come. It's dangerous here." I hesitated, my heart pounding. "Why should I trust you?" I yelled back. "Because I know what lies ahead," she pleaded, her eyes filled with urgency. "You can't ignore the past." Ignoring the warning bells in my head, I stepped onto the hidden trail. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around me. I felt a presence lurking just beyond my sight, feeding on my fear. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I stumbled, grasping for a tree to steady myself. The path was alive, shifting like a living thing. I could hear whispers, a cacophony of voices urging me to turn back, but I pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. Finally, I reached a clearing. In the center stood an ancient tree, gnarled and twisted, its roots snaking across the ground like fingers. At its base lay a weathered stone, etched with names, hikers who had vanished over the years. "Jake," the woman's voice echoed in my mind. "You must understand." I knelt beside the stone, tracing the names with trembling fingers. Each one felt like a weight on my heart, a reminder of lives lost and stories left unfinished. "Why?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "What happened to you?" The air thickened, and the shadows around me deepened. I felt a surge of anger and despair, as if the very spirit of the trail was awakening. "Feed on their fear," a voice hissed, chilling me to the bone. "That is what I do." I looked up, and there it was, a dark figure, swirling with shadows, its eyes glowing with malice. It reached out, tendrils of darkness curling toward me. "No!" I shouted, scrambling back. "I won't let you take me." In that moment, I remembered the apparitions, their warnings. They had been trapped, just like me, feeding the spirit's power with their fear. I had to fight back. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, my voice rising above the whispers. I focused on the names carved in the stone, on the lives that had been lost. "You won't take me. I won't be your prisoner." The figure recoiled, the shadows swirling violently around it. I felt a surge of energy, a light breaking through the darkness. The spirits of the lost hikers surrounded me, their forms glowing with a soft light. Together, they urged, their voices harmonizing. "We can break the curse." I closed my eyes, feeling their presence strengthen me. I reached deep within, summoning every ounce of courage I had. "You don't control me," I shouted, my voice echoing in the clearing. With a final surge of will, I pushed back against the darkness. The figure shrieked, its form dissolving into the shadows, and the air around me lightened. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was bathed in sunlight. The ancient tree stood tall and proud, and the stone was now smooth, the names glowing faintly. I stumbled back, panting. I had escaped, but I felt different, changed. I turned to leave, the trail now clear before me. As I walked back, the memories of the apparitions lingered in my mind. I had seen things I couldn't explain, and I could no longer deny the existence of the supernatural. Emerging from the woods, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but the haunting voices of the lost hikers remained with me. I had escaped the trail, but I knew I would carry its secrets forever. "Find the truth," I whispered to myself, glancing back at the trees. I had come searching for clarity, and I had found something far more profound. The past would always be a part of me, and I was ready to face it. The autumn air was sharp and cold as I stepped into the woods. Leaves crunched under my boots, and my heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. My name is Mia, and I'm an investigative journalist. Today, I was determined to uncover the dark secrets of the forgotten asylum. "Are you sure about this, Mia?" Jake, my cameraman, asked. He was adjusting the strap on his camera, his brow furrowed with concern. "Of course," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We need to know what really happened here. The rumors about unethical experiments, they can't just be stories." The asylum stood before us, a giant shadow in the fading light. Vines climbed the walls, and broken windows looked down like empty eyes. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I pushed it away. This was my chance to expose the truth. Our team was small but dedicated. Besides Jake, there was Lisa, our tech expert, and Sam, a historian who loved all things creepy. We had spent weeks preparing for this moment. We gathered old newspaper articles, talked to locals, and even found diaries from former patients. The asylum had been closed for decades, but its dark past still whispered through the trees. "Let's set up the cameras," Lisa said, pulling out her equipment. "I want to capture any strange happenings." "Right," I replied, trying to shake off my unease. "Let's get to work." As we entered the asylum, the air felt heavy with dust and decay. The walls were peeling, and rusted metal fixtures hung loosely. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter and cries that once filled these halls. My heart ached for the souls who had suffered here. "Look at this," Sam called, pointing to a faded sign on the wall. "It says Ward B, experimental treatments." "Experimental treatments?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a fancy way to say torture." I nodded, feeling the weight of our mission. We need to find out what really happened in Ward B. As we moved deeper into the asylum, strange things began to happen. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, and the temperature dropped suddenly, making my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves, but deep down, I knew something was off. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Hear what?" I asked, straining to listen. A distant wail echoed through the halls, chilling me to the bone. It sounded like a cry for help. "Let's keep moving," I said, trying to sound brave. "We're here to uncover the truth." We made our way to the basement, the air growing heavier with each step. The stairs creaked ominously under our weight, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The basement was dark, with only our flashlights cutting through the gloom. "Over here," Sam said, pointing to a door at the far end. "It looks like it hasn't been opened in years." With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Inside, we found a room filled with dusty medical equipment, charts, and journals. My heart raced as I skimmed through the papers, revealing horrific accounts of experiments conducted on patients, treatments that bordered on torture. "This is worse than I thought," I murmured, my hands shaking as I read about lobotomies and forced confinement. They treated these people like animals. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing our flashlights. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, its screen casting a dim glow. "Guys, stay close," I shouted, my voice trembling. As we huddled together, the air thickened, and I felt a presence surrounding us. Whispers filled the room, incoherent yet filled with anguish. I could almost make out words: "Help us, free us." "Who's there?" Jake called, his voice barely above a whisper. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath in the air. Then, the shadows began to take shape, figures emerging from the darkness, their faces twisted in pain and rage. "Get out," one of them screamed, its voice echoing with despair. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. "We need to leave. Now." As we turned to flee, the spirits surged forward, their hands reaching out as if to pull us into their torment. I felt a cold grip on my wrist, and I screamed, struggling against the invisible force. "Run!" Sam shouted, and we dashed back through the basement, the spirits' wails echoing behind us. We burst out of the asylum, gasping for air, the autumn chill biting at our skin. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods, collapsing against a tree, our hearts racing. "What just happened?" Lisa panted, her face pale. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaky. "But they were trapped here. We need to do something." The experience had left us shaken, but I felt a fire igniting within me. The asylum's dark history couldn't remain buried. I had to tell their story, to honor the souls who had suffered here. In the days that followed, we worked tirelessly to document our findings. The footage we captured was chilling, but it also revealed the humanity behind the suffering. Each patient had a name, a story, and I was determined to share it. But the experience lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness we had faced. I often found myself waking in the night, haunted by the cries of the trapped spirits. I had uncovered the truth, but the weight of it pressed heavily on my soul. The asylum remained a mystery, a place where the past refused to stay buried. And as I continued my work, I knew that the echoes of its tortured history would forever shape my understanding of truth and justice. The spirits had found a voice through me, and I would ensure they were never forgotten. I gathered my team one last time to discuss our next steps. "We need to share what we found," I said, determination in my voice. "These people deserve to be remembered." Jake nodded, his usual skepticism replaced with resolve. "Let's make sure their stories are told." As we prepared to release our findings, I felt a sense of purpose. The asylum's dark past was not just a story, it was a warning. A reminder of the consequences of cruelty and the importance of compassion. We had faced the darkness, and now it was time to shine a light on the truth. In the end, the forgotten asylum was not just a place of horror, it became a symbol of hope. A reminder that even in the depths of despair, the truth could set us free. And as I looked back one last time at the asylum, I knew that its ghosts would always be with me, guiding me to seek justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. I love the outdoors. There's something about the smell of pine and the sound of a crackling fire that makes me feel alive. This summer, I was excited to lead my friends on a camping trip deep in the wilderness. Mia, my girlfriend, was especially eager. She had a way of connecting with nature that I admired. "Sam, this is going to be amazing," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm as we set up our tents. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the campsite. Our friends, Jake, Sarah, and Tom, were busy gathering firewood and joking around. "Just wait until you see the stars tonight," I promised, feeling a sense of pride. "This place is perfect." As darkness fell, we gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The flickering flames danced in the cool night air, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. But as the night wore on, I noticed something strange. The trees seemed to shift slightly, their silhouettes warping in the firelight. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, trying to shake off the unease creeping in. "See what?" Jake replied, his mouth full of esmores. "I don't know, it just felt like the trees moved," I said, glancing at Mia. She was staring into the darkness, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's just your imagination," she suggested, but her voice was soft, almost hesitant. The next morning, I woke up to a strange silence. The usual sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling were absent. I crawled out of the tent, rubbing my eyes, and looked around. "Where's the fire pit?" I asked, confusion washing over me. The campsite looked different. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, stepping out of her tent. "The fire pit, it was right there," I pointed, but the spot I indicated was empty. "It's just a campsite, Sam." "It's all the same," Tom said, yawning. But I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Something was off. We spent the day hiking, trying to shake the strange feeling. Mia and I wandered off the trail, and she knelt to examine a cluster of wildflowers. "Look at these, Sam." "They're beautiful," she said, her fingers brushing the petals. "They're nice," I replied, but I was still distracted by the shifting campsite. That night, as we sat around the fire again, I noticed the trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like fingers. "Do you guys ever feel like we're being watched?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Of course not. You're just being paranoid," Jake laughed, but I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. The following morning, we woke up to find our campsite had moved again. This time, the tents were positioned in a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. "This is ridiculous," I said, frustration bubbling up. "How can we keep ending up in different places?" "It's just the wind or something," Tom shrugged, but I could see the worry etched on his face. As the day progressed, the atmosphere grew heavier. Mia seemed distant, her connection to nature now tinged with apprehension. "Sam, I think something is wrong," she whispered to me as we walked along a narrow trail. "I can feel it in the air," she said, her voice shaking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. When I woke up the next morning, I found Mia missing. Panic surged through me as I called her name. "Mia, where are you?" The others stumbled out of their tents, confusion spreading across their faces. "We need to find her," I said, my voice rising. We searched the area, calling her name, but it was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. "Sam, look!" Tom shouted, pointing to a series of strange symbols carved into the trees. "What are those?" I asked, my heart pounding. "They look like some kind of ritual," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Just then, I felt a chill in the air, and the trees seemed to whisper. I remembered the ghost story Jake had told. The spirit that trapped lost souls. "We need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. But as we turned to pack our things, the campsite shifted again. The tents were gone, replaced by a thick fog that enveloped us. "Stay close," I shouted, fear gripping me. We stumbled through the fog, disoriented. I could hear whispers, soft and insistent, urging us to stay. "Mia!" I called out, desperation clawing at my throat. Suddenly, I saw her figure ahead, standing still. "Mia!" I ran towards her, but as I reached out, she vanished into the mist. "Sam!" Jake yelled, pulling me back. "We can't go that way," he said, his voice trembling. I felt a surge of anger. "We have to find her." But the forest was closing in, the trees bending and twisting as if alive. "Wait!" Sarah shouted, pointing to the symbols on the trees. "Maybe they're a way to appease the spirit," I said, my voice rising. We gathered around the symbols, our hearts racing. I remembered the ancient stories I'd heard as a kid. "We need to perform a ritual. It's the only way to free her," I said, my voice shaking. The group nodded, determination replacing fear. We gathered around the symbols, our hands joined, and began to chant. The forest trembled around us, the whispers growing louder. Suddenly, the ground shook, and a dark figure emerged from the fog. It was the spirit, its eyes glowing with malice. "Leave this place," it roared, but we pressed on, our voices rising in unison. With one final chant, I held out Mia's necklace. The spirit hesitated, its form flickering. "Please, let her go," I cried, my heart pounding. The spirit reached for the necklace, and in that moment, the fog began to lift. Mia appeared, her eyes wide with fear but alive. "Sam," she cried, rushing into my arms. I pulled her close, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The spirit shrieked, its form dissolving into the air. As the last remnants of fog vanished, we found ourselves back at our original campsite, the fire still smoldering. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, looking at my friends. "We need to leave." "Now," I said, feeling a sense of urgency. We packed up quickly, the weight of what we had experienced heavy on our shoulders. As we drove away, I glanced back at the forest, now just a collection of trees under a clear sky. Mia sat beside me, her hand in mine. "Sam, do you think it's really over?" I sighed, feeling the scars of our encounter. "I hope so. But I'll never look at nature the same way again." The wilderness had shown us its hidden depths, and we were forever changed. The illusion of safety had shattered, leaving us to grapple with the unknown. I've always been drawn to the mist-covered lake nestled deep in the mountains. The way the fog rolled off the water, casting an eerie glow over the surrounding trees, was mesmerizing. As a nature photographer, I knew I had to capture the scene. I had spent months planning my trip, researching the best times to visit, and preparing my equipment. But as I arrived at the lake, I realized I wasn't alone. A local, with a deep-seated fear of the lake, stood at the edge of the water. His eyes were fixed on the mist, his face pale with fear. I approached him cautiously, trying to understand why he was so afraid. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked. He turned to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here. The lake is cursed." I laughed, thinking he was just trying to scare me off. "Cursed? That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?" He shook his head. "No, it's true. People have gone missing here. The lake has a malevolent entity that preys on intruders." I dismissed his words as superstition, but a shiver ran down my spine. I had always been drawn to the unknown, and the idea of a curse only added to the allure. I decided to explore the lake, despite his warnings. As I walked along the shore, the mist thickened, and the air grew heavy with an otherworldly presence. The trees seemed to lean in, as if listening to some unseen force. I felt a chill run through me, but I pushed on, determined to capture the perfect shot. Suddenly, the mist parted, revealing a clearing. In the center stood a massive, ancient tree, its branches twisted and gnarled. The air around it seemed to shimmer, as if the very fabric of reality was distorted. I felt a sense of unease, but my camera was ready, and I couldn't resist the urge to capture this strange anomaly. As I approached the tree, the mist closed in again, and I felt a strange sensation. It was as if the air itself was alive, and it was watching me. I shivered, but my curiosity was piqued. I had to know more about this place. I turned to the local, who was still standing at the edge of the lake, his eyes fixed on the mist. "What's the story behind this tree?" I asked. He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "The tree is said to be the source of the curse. It's where the entity first appeared, centuries ago." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, appeared? What kind of entity is it?" He looked at me with a mixture of fear and pity. "It's a malevolent force that manipulates water and shadows. It's said to prey on those who seek to uncover its secrets." I laughed, trying to dismiss his words as superstition. But deep down, I felt a sense of unease. The locals' fear was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lake, I felt a strange sensation. The air seemed to grow heavier, and the mist thickened. I knew I had to leave, but my curiosity was too strong. I decided to stay, to capture the perfect shot of the misty lake. But as I set up my camera, I felt a strange presence. The air seemed to grow colder, and the mist began to swirl around me. I felt a sense of unease, but I pushed on, determined to capture the perfect shot. Suddenly, the mist parted, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, shrouded in darkness, emerged from the water. It was tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to burn with an inner light. I felt a sense of terror, but I was frozen in place, my camera still in hand. The entity moved towards me, its shadow stretching out like a dark, malevolent hand. I felt a strange sensation, as if the air itself was alive, and it was trying to pull me in. I tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The entity's voice, low and menacing, whispered in my ear. "You should not have come here. You will never leave this place." I felt a sense of terror, but I knew I had to fight. I raised my camera, determined to capture the entity's image. But as I did, I felt a strange sensation. The camera seemed to be alive, and it was fighting back against the entity. The entity's shadow began to writhe and twist, as if it was being pulled back into the water. I felt a sense of relief, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. The local, who had been watching from a distance, rushed towards me, his eyes fixed on the entity. Together, we fought against the entity, using the camera as a makeshift shield. The entity's attacks grew more intense, but we held our ground. Finally, the mist began to clear, and the entity vanished back into the water. As we stumbled away from the lake, I felt a sense of relief, but also a deep sense of unease. The local's words echoed in my mind, "The lake is cursed. It's better to leave it alone." I knew he was right. The lake had a malevolent force that preyed on those who sought to uncover its secrets. I had been driven by my obsession with capturing the perfect shot, but I had almost paid the ultimate price. As I left the lake, I knew I would never return. The experience had left me deeply scarred, and my perception of nature had changed forever. I realized that some places are better left unsolved, and that the cost of obsession can be far greater than the reward. The local, who had been watching me, walked beside me. His eyes were fixed on the mist, his face pale with fear. I knew he would never forget the horrors he had seen, and I knew I would never forget the terror I had experienced. As we walked away from the lake, the mist began to clear, and the sun began to set. The air seemed to grow lighter, but I knew that the curse of the lake would never be forgotten. The story of the unseen entity would haunt me forever, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. I gripped my shovel tightly as I approached the hidden clearing deep within the ancient forest. My heart raced with excitement and trepidation. After months of research, I had finally discovered the location of an archaeological site that could rewrite history. As I entered the clearing, I noticed a group of locals gathered around a large, moss-covered stone. They eyed me suspiciously as I approached. An older man stepped forward. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice gruff. "This place is not for outsiders." I tried to explain my purpose, but he cut me off. "You don't understand. This is sacred ground. Evil lives here." I scoffed at his superstitious warning and pressed on with my team. We began carefully excavating the site, uncovering ancient artifacts and symbols. The locals watched in silence, their faces etched with dread. As night fell, I heard strange whispers on the wind. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I shook off the uneasy feeling and continued working by lantern light. Suddenly, the locals began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. They formed a circle around the stone, their voices rising in intensity. I approached them, demanding an explanation. The old man grabbed my arm, his eyes wild. "You've awoken it. The demon will come for us all." I shook him off, dismissing his hysterics. But as I turned back to the dig site, I froze in horror. The artifacts were levitating, spinning faster and faster. An unearthly howl pierced the night. The locals scattered in terror. I tried to run but found myself paralyzed. A dark mist coalesced before me, taking the shape of a towering, horned figure. Its glowing red eyes bored into my soul, filling me with dread. "Foolish mortal," it growled in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You dare to disturb my slumber?" I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The demon's clawed hand shot towards me. I braced for the end. But the blow never came. A blinding light erupted from the spinning artifacts, engulfing the demon. It let out an unearthly wail as it was torn apart by the energy. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. The light faded, and the artifacts fell to the ground with a clatter. The clearing was silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. I stumbled to my feet, my mind reeling. What the hell had just happened? I searched for my team but found only their abandoned equipment. The locals were nowhere to be seen. I made my way out of the forest, my legs shaking. I had to get help, call the authorities. But as I reached the edge of the trees, I froze. The demon stood before me, its form flickering like a glitch in reality. "You cannot escape me, mortal," it hissed. "I will haunt your dreams, consume your soul." I turned and ran, my lungs burning. I ran until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glimpsed the demon in my rearview mirror, its glowing eyes boring into me. I drove straight to the police station, babbling out my story. They listened with skepticism, but agreed to investigate. A search party was assembled, but when they reached the clearing, it was empty. No trace of the dig site, the artifacts, or the demon. I was dismissed as a crank, a lunatic. But I knew the truth. The demon was real, and it was after me. I could feel its presence, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. It followed me, haunting my every step. I tried to go on with my life, but the demon was always there, whispering in my ear. It showed me visions of my loved ones being torn apart, of the world consumed by darkness. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was a wreck. Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I scoured the internet for information on demons, on ways to banish them. I found an obscure website that claimed to have the answers I sought. It led me to a secluded cabin in the mountains, where an old woman lived. She listened to my story with a grave expression. "You've opened a door that should have remained closed," she said. "But there may be a way to close it." She taught me an ancient ritual, one that would bind the demon to this plane and allow me to confront it. I gathered the necessary ingredients and prepared myself mentally and spiritually. The ritual was excruciating, both physically and emotionally. I felt the demon's claws tearing at my mind, my soul. But I persevered, driven by a desperation to be free. Finally, it was over. The demon materialized before me, its form flickering and unstable. "You cannot defeat me," it hissed. "I am eternal." I raised my hand, holding a glowing crystal. "Maybe," I said. "But I can trap you." I crushed the crystal, and a blinding light erupted from it. The demon let out a shriek of agony as it was pulled into the light. It reached for me, its claws inches from my face, before it vanished in a flash. The light faded, and the cabin was silent. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The demon was gone, banished to some other plane of existence. I was free. But the scars it left on my mind and soul would never fully heal. I had seen the darkness that lurks in the world, the ancient evils that humanity has forgotten. And I knew that I could never go back to the way I was before. I left the cabin, stepping out into the sunlight. It was a new day, a new beginning. But I would never forget the ritual clearing, and the demon that nearly consumed me. It was a reminder that some secrets are better left undisturbed. I never thought I would find myself in a place like this. James and I had been planning this trip for months, hoping to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and reconnect with each other. We chose this remote cabin in the woods, thinking it would be the perfect getaway. But as we arrived, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cabin was old and run down, with peeling paint and a creaky porch. The surrounding forest was dense and dark, casting long shadows over the clearing. I tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine, but James seemed to sense it too. We spent the first day exploring the cabin, trying to get a feel for the place. There were old books and journals scattered about, and I couldn't help but wonder who had lived here before us. James found a dusty journal with a faded cover, and as he flipped through the pages, his eyes widened in surprise. "Hey, Lily," he said, his voice low and serious. "I think I found something." I walked over to him, and he handed me the journal. The writing was old and faded, but I could make out the words. The entries were cryptic, filled with warnings and prophecies. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the last entry. "May the curse of the forest fall upon those who dare disturb the peace of this cabin. May they know the terror of the woods and the madness that lurks within." I looked up at James, my eyes wide with fear. He nodded, his expression grim. "I think we should leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But James shook his head. "We can't leave now," he said. "We've come too far. We need to understand what's going on." I knew he was right, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger as the day wore on. We decided to stay the night, hoping to uncover more about the curse and the cabin's history. As the sun began to set, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. The trees creaked and groaned, and I felt a chill run down my spine. James and I sat by the fire, trying to keep warm and to keep each other company. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from upstairs. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with fear. James grabbed a flashlight and headed up the stairs, calling out my name. I followed, my heart racing. As we reached the top of the stairs, we saw that the window had been broken, and the room was in disarray. James shone the flashlight around, but there was no one there. We stood there, frozen in fear, as the wind howled outside. The next day, we decided to explore the surrounding forest. We had seen a clearing not far from the cabin, and we thought it might hold the key to the curse. As we walked, the trees seemed to close in around us, and the air grew thick with an oppressive silence. We reached the clearing, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. In the center of the clearing stood an old, weathered tree, its bark cracked and peeling. James walked over to the tree, his eyes fixed on the ground. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. He knelt down, and I saw that he was looking at a small, intricately carved stone. It was etched with strange symbols and words, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. As we stood there, the wind picked up again, and the trees began to sway. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. James looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But it was too late. The curse had already taken hold. The trees began to move, their branches reaching out to ensnare us. The wind grew stronger, and the air was filled with the sound of screaming. James and I clung to each other, trying to stay together in the midst of the chaos. But the curse was too powerful. It pulled us apart, and we found ourselves lost in the darkness of the forest. I don't know how long we wandered, but eventually, we stumbled upon the cabin again. The door was open, and we rushed inside, desperate to find safety. But the curse had followed us. The cabin was in disarray, and the air was thick with an otherworldly presence. James and I huddled together, trying to keep warm and to keep each other company. But the curse was relentless. It tormented us with visions of our deepest fears and insecurities. It preyed on our weaknesses, making us question our sanity and our very existence. As the days turned into weeks, we began to lose ourselves to the curse. We became paranoid and delusional, convinced that the forest was alive and that it was trying to kill us. We fought each other, and we fought ourselves, driven mad by the curse's relentless torment. But even in our madness, we knew that we had to escape. We had to get out of the cabin and away from the curse. We had to find a way to break free from the forest's grasp. One day, as we were huddled together in the corner of the cabin, we heard a distant sound. It was the sound of a car engine, and it seemed to be getting closer. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with hope. "We have to get out of here," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. We stumbled out of the cabin, our bodies weak and emaciated from the curse's torment. We saw a car driving up the dirt road, and we ran towards it, desperate for rescue. As we approached the car, we saw that it was a police officer. He looked at us, his eyes filled with concern. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low and serious. James and I looked at each other, our faces pale and gaunt. We knew that we had to tell him the truth, no matter how crazy it sounded. "We were cursed," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. The officer looked at us, his expression skeptical. But as he listened to our story, his eyes grew wide with fear. He knew that we were telling the truth, and he knew that we had to get out of there. We spent the next few days in the hospital, recovering from our ordeal. The doctors told us that we had been through a traumatic experience, and that it would take time to recover. James and I sat in the hospital room, holding hands, our eyes fixed on the door. We knew that we had to move on, but we couldn't shake the feeling that the curse was still out there, waiting for us. As we left the hospital, we looked back at the cabin, now a distant memory. We knew that we would never forget what had happened there, and we knew that we would always be haunted by the curse's relentless torment. But we also knew that we had survived, and that we had found each other again. We held hands, our hearts filled with a sense of hope and determination. We knew that we would face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. I've been coming to this lake for years, seeking solace and reflection. The quiet, the stillness, the way the sun sets over the water, it's like nothing else. But this summer, something feels different. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like I'm being watched. I've been camping here for a week now, and I've seen strange things. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the more I stay, the more I'm convinced that something is off. The trees seem to lean in, the water seems to move in ways it shouldn't. I've been trying to ignore it, but it's hard. I feel like I'm being pulled into something I don't understand. I've tried to talk to the locals, but they just look at me like I'm crazy. They warn me to stay away from the lake, to leave it alone. But I can't. I need to know what's going on. I've been exploring the lake, trying to find answers. I've seen strange markings on the rocks, symbols that seem to be warning me away. I've heard whispers in the wind, voices that seem to be calling me. But I can't leave. I need to know what's happening. I've been talking to an old man who lives nearby. He's been warning me about the lake, telling me stories about the creatures that live in the depths. He says they're ancient, that they've been here since the beginning of time. He says they're cursed, that they'll do anything to get out of the water. I don't know if I believe him, but I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. I've been seeing things, hearing things. I've been having nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat. I've been trying to stay awake, to keep watch over the lake. But it's hard. I feel like I'm being pulled into a dream, a nightmare that I can't wake up from. I've been trying to fight it, but it's no use. The lake is winning. I can feel it, the power of the water, the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. I've been trying to run, but I can't. I'm trapped, caught in the lake's grasp. I can feel the creatures closing in, their cold, dead eyes staring at me. I've been trying to scream, but I can't. My voice is gone, replaced by the whispers of the wind. I've been trying to pray, but I can't. The lake is all that's left, the darkness that's consumed me. I've been trying to survive, but I know it's no use. The lake will win, and I will be lost forever. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. I was covered in sweat, and my clothes were damp. I looked around, but I was alone. The lake was still, the trees were silent. I knew I had to get out of here. I had to leave the lake behind, to forget about the creatures and the darkness. But I knew it was too late. The lake had claimed me, and I was lost forever. I packed up my things, my heart heavy with despair. I knew I would never come back to this lake, never again seek solace in its quiet waters. The lake had shown me the true face of darkness, and I would never forget. As I drove away, I looked back at the lake, its surface still and calm. But I knew that beneath the surface, the creatures were waiting, their cold, dead eyes staring at me. I knew that I would never be free of the lake, that it would haunt me forever. I drove away, my heart heavy with the knowledge that I would never be the same again. The lake had changed me, had shown me the true face of darkness. And I knew that I would never forget. The allure of old, forgotten places has always been a siren call for me. The idea of delving into hidden histories and discovering the secrets that lie beneath the surface is irresistible. My friends and I have spent years exploring abandoned sites, factories, hospitals, and once grand homes now reduced to dust and echoes. But nothing compared to the asylum we set out to investigate. This asylum was different, ancient, forbidding, and decayed beyond imagination. Its reputation as a site of horror and tragedy had only heightened my curiosity. The walls were cloaked in layers of rust, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. My friends were more hesitant than usual, wary of the dark tales that surrounded the asylum. But I managed to persuade them. We entered through a broken window, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The initial exploration felt routine. We found rusty old equipment, discarded tools, and faded personal items, nothing too extraordinary. But as we ventured further, a sense of unease settled over us. The asylum seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. We stumbled upon old journals, their pages yellowed and brittle. The entries detailed the grim experiences of patients subjected to brutal treatments and neglect. The journals spoke of dark rooms and cruel experiments, painting a picture of suffering that sent chills down our spines. We pressed on, driven by a mix of morbid curiosity and a desire to uncover more. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the asylum became. The air grew colder, and strange noises began to echo through the hallways. We found ourselves in a room cluttered with medical equipment, machines that looked like relics from a bygone era. But something was wrong. The equipment seemed almost alive, its metal surfaces gleaming with an unsettling sheen. As we stood there, the rumbling sound intensified. It came from the equipment, a low, mechanical growl that grew louder and more insistent. Fear gripped us. We exchanged panicked glances and decided it was time to leave. But as we turned to retreat, the asylum seemed to close in around us. The walls seemed to shift, and the corridors twisted into an incomprehensible maze. Our attempts to escape only led us deeper into the darkness. The equipment began to move, its parts grinding and clanking as if animated by some unseen force. We ran, our footsteps echoing off the walls, but the asylum seemed to conspire against us. The low rumble grew into a deafening roar, and we were enveloped in shadows. Then we saw it, a tall, shadowy figure standing in the hallway. It was cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by a long, flowing coat that seemed to merge with the gloom. The figure moved with a strange, jerky motion, as though it were both incredibly slow and impossibly fast. It glided towards us, and despite our desperate attempts to evade it, the figure closed the gap with eerie inevitability. In a blind panic, we scattered. I tried to find a way out, but the asylum's labyrinthine corridors twisted and turned, each path leading only to more darkness. The figure was relentless, its presence a chilling specter that seemed to reach into the very core of my being. I could hear my friends' screams, their terror mingling with my own. It was as if the asylum itself was alive, a sentient entity feeding on our fear. I managed to find a small window that had been partially obscured by debris. With a burst of adrenaline, I squeezed through, emerging into the cold night air. I looked back, but the asylum's shadows swallowed the sight of my friends. I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I reached the safety of the streetlights. The asylum was behind me, but its horrors were not so easily left behind. I returned home, but the images of that night haunted me. My friends were gone, swallowed by the darkness that had seemed so alive. Guilt and grief plagued me, gnawing at my sanity. I replayed every moment in my mind, agonizing over what might have been different, what I could have done to save them. Each day felt like a struggle. The weight of survival was almost too much to bear. I could hear their voices, see their faces, and the knowledge that I was the only one to make it out alive tormented me. I was trapped in a cycle of self-blame and despair. I tried to reach out for help, but the weight of my guilt made it hard to connect with others. I felt like I was living in a shadow of my former self, unable to move forward, stuck in a place between life and death. The asylum's presence lingered in my dreams. It was a place of endless corridors and shifting shadows, where the same figure pursued me night after night. I began to question my own sanity, wondering if the asylum had left a part of itself within me. My search for peace became a relentless quest, a journey that seemed to lead only to deeper darkness. I sought ways to forgive myself, to let go of the crushing guilt. I tried therapy, meditation, and self-reflection, but nothing seemed to quell the haunting memories. The faces of my friends, their laughter, and their fear remained etched in my mind. I felt as though I was being punished for surviving while they were lost. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. It was as though the asylum had left an indelible mark on my soul. I was constantly haunted by the thought that I had failed them, that my survival was somehow tainted. My only solace was the knowledge that I had to keep moving, to keep searching for a way to make peace with what had happened. In the end, the asylum remains a dark chapter in my life, a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and peril, and the heavy cost of exploring the unknown. I have learned that some secrets are better left buried, and that the past, no matter how terrifying, is always a part of who we are.